We have been talking about this for years, and at one point, at the beginning, the outset of this war, it was thought that this is how Ukraine would pay for itself. We remember the images of the massive yachts being brought into port here in the U.S., in some cases in Europe. Why is this so controversial?
So I think that the issue in terms of support for Ukraine is not controversial. And I think you have many governments across Europe that are earnestly trying to make sure that they can do this. That's why I think President Zelensky's confidence that this, 140 billion some odd assets will be used to support Ukraine, I think his confidence is well-founded. But there's, a lot of concern about setting a precedent for other sovereign assets in some other international legal context. And so I think that the Europeans wanted to be unified, and Belgium, which actually has most of these assets in its country in terms of its banking system, also wanted to make sure that this was a unified approach and that they didn't have a greater risk than the other countries. I think they're going to get there. I similarly think that the U.S. is going to get there. I mean, we had tremendous support from Congress to confiscate these Russian assets, actually, that the U.S. has. It's a very small amount compared to the Europeans, but still symbolically important. So I think also the U.S. will join with Europe.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask what sort of difference this money would make. Can you just put into context for us, how much is $162 billion in loans to Ukraine? What could they do with that sort of money behind them?
Well, I think there's the monetary piece, and then there's the meaning and symbolism, which is maybe not as important, but very important. So in terms of the monetary piece, just think about the first 3 years of war, just the security assistance that the United States and Europe provided. Each basically provided $65 billion in security assistance. That was for 3 years of grinding war when Ukraine defense industry wasn't really producing that much at first. And Ukraine defense industry, frankly, is a heck of a lot cheaper than US and European equipment. But then there's the meaning behind this. And right now, Putin is looking to Europe and he is looking to the United States, and he is trying to gauge, are you really in? And how long are you in? And so if we signal, hey, we just freed up, billions, $140 billion plus for Ukraine, we are in it for the long haul, this starts to change his calculus a bit.
Interesting. It sure seems Putin is in it for the long haul based on what we heard from the former head of MI6, Richard Moore, sat down with Bloomberg and said that recent intelligence assessments show Vladimir Putin has no intention of reaching a peace deal with Ukraine and, in fact, is arming up for winter. What do you make of this?
Well, I think if you look at what Putin is saying to his own population, it gives you a sense of the bind he's put himself in. Because he is telling the Russian public that Russia is succeeding, that Russia is making steady progress on the battlefield, and that Russia will achieve the goals that he outlined at the very beginning of this, goals of subjugating all of Ukraine and rolling back NATO forces from their existing borders. So he is telling his people that this is achievable. Meantime, what we know is that, Russia is at over 1 million casualties in this war. And we know that even though Russia has managed to survive on, a defense industry heavy economy, their time will not last forever. So Putin is playing a very cynical game with his own population because he knows he has staked his entire presidency on this war.
Wow.
What about the squeeze of U.S. sanctions on Russian energy supplies? Because there is data showing that we've seen a drop when it comes to Russian crude exports, but we also know that barrels still make their way to the market. How is that impacting the calculus that's playing out right now?
So I think this is a move that we have to watch over time. And the signal that it sends is incredibly positive because it shows that, we are prepared to take punitive action against Russia for this war. Putin didn't come to the table. He didn't agree to a ceasefire. Therefore, there will be punishment. So that's terrific. But sanctions are all about implementation and about following through to make sure that all of these transactions actually are accounted for. And that's where it was tough work for the Europeans when they initiated sanctions. It was tough work for the United States when we first initiated sanctions. And so this administration is going to really have to roll up their sleeves and follow the money.
The president appears, Trump that is, not ready to provide Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine as President Zelensky had asked. Well, the Department of Defense has approved this if the president wants to go ahead with it. He's made clear that he's not ready to do that now. How quickly would the war end if he did?
So this is really important to take in context. The Tomahawk is a phenomenal capability, tremendously useful on the battlefield, but there really isn't a silver bullet here. There's no one capability that can just end this war, and that's in part because it's not just about the capability, it's about the quantity, and it's about what you're actually targeting. So we know that long-range strike is high on Ukraine's list of capabilities that they want to see more of. Right now, the most efficient and cost-effective way to do that is actually supporting Ukraine's long-range drone industry, because they can do it at a lower price point, and the volume they can produce in a short amount of time is nothing like some of these exquisite missiles. I'm not saying they don't need missiles. I'm just saying you can't rely on that.
How do these discussions work when you're in the administration? Because we had the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. tell us last week that there were positive talks, in her words, when it came to the Tomahawk missiles. But what does diplomacy look like when we are negotiating over the type of weaponry that we could be sending abroad? Well,
I cannot speak for this administration, and I don't know what their internal conversations are. But when we were looking to support Ukraine with, the best of U.S. equipment, we always looked at what will the effect be on, in the battle space? How will this be used, and will it be really useful? We looked at our own readiness implications, and do we have enough of this to be able to provide it to Ukraine in a meaningful way? Again, providing one missile doesn't really do much. And we also would look at what are our allies doing versus what we're doing. And I think we always would find a way to increase allied contribution so that we could work on this together. Now what you have is really it's the allies shouldering the burden, and the U.S. is not really putting new security assistance on the table. So it's more lopsided in that way now.
I'm just curious, while you're still with us, what is that investigation or review like when you need to determine, do we have enough of, in this case, Tomahawk missiles to share with Ukraine? Are you mapping out different conflicts and figuring out how many missiles would be required if China invaded Taiwan, for instance? What is that calculus like?
So, this is where the U.S. military is absolutely phenomenal in their planning capability. So they have looked at, a whole host of scenarios around the world where the U.S. military might need to respond, and they have looked at what are those requirements in terms of equipment and munitions. And so we have all kinds of, analytic products that show precisely which variant even. So we can know that it's not just about the missile, it's about the missile variant, and we know what quantities we need to keep on hand. So it's something we pay a lot of attention to, and we were still able to provide, phenomenal support for Ukraine, even within those constraints.